I still live in the same region, but I don't rent that little place anymore. I'm older now and winter doesn't feel like a novelty the way it used to. Back then, though, snow was my favorite kind of quiet. I liked the way it swallowed sound and made everything look clean, like the world had been reset overnight. At the time, I lived alone in a small rental on the edge of a town that people mostly just drove through. My street had lights, but they were spaced far apart, and after midnight, the whole neighborhood felt empty. Behind the last row of houses was a band of trees that led into a much larger wooded area. It wasn't true wilderness, but it was close enough that you'd sometimes see deer tracks in the morning or hear coyotes when the wind was right. My routine was simple: work during the day, microwave dinner, watch something mindless, then read until I got tired. I wasn't a shut-in exactly, just quiet. I liked predictability. Nothing about that night started differently. I remember washing a mug in the sink, setting it upside down to dry, and glancing at the clock because I thought it was later than it was. The landlord had warned me about cold snaps, so I kept a space heater in the hall closet and a shovel by the back steps. I'd lived there 2 winters already and never had anything worse than a frozen doorknob. The neighbors were polite in that distant way, waves from driveways, a nod at the mailbox, nothing that ever turned into real conversation. That's when I noticed the first flakes outside my window. Not a few drifting around, but a steady fall, thick and confident. It had been clear earlier, and I'd checked the forecast like I always did in winter. No snow, maybe a chance of flurries. What I saw looked like the start of a real storm. I stood there for a minute watching the streetlight glow turn soft and hazy as the air filled up. The cars parked along the curb started to disappear around the edges. The sound in the room felt different too, like the house was holding its breath. I told myself it would be gone by morning. I had no idea that within an hour I'd be wishing it had never started at all. The snow kept coming, and instead of feeling annoyed, I felt that familiar pull I always used to get when winter did something unexpected. It wasn't logical. Most people see sudden snowfall and think about shoveling, sliding, getting stuck. I saw it and wanted to be in it just for a little while before it got messy. I put on my boots, a thick hoodie, and the old insulated jacket I kept by the door. I didn't bother with anything fancy: hat, gloves, my phone in my pocket. I even remember thinking, I'll be back in 20 minutes. I left the house lights on, locked up, and stepped into the driveway. The air had that clean metallic cold to it. Snowflakes hit my cheeks and melted instantly, then more followed. My car was already dusted over, and the street looked empty in the way it only does when everyone decides to stay inside at the same time. I didn't want to just walk around my block. I wanted real quiet. A few minutes away there was a small trailhead I'd been to in the fall. It wasn't deep backcountry or anything, just a local hiking loop that cut behind some undeveloped land and connected to a wider stretch of trees. In daylight, it was harmless. At night, in fresh snow, it felt like a different place. I drove there slowly, tires crunching, wipers pushing slush that hadn't even had time to form yet. The parking area was empty, which made sense. No one goes out for a casual hike when the weather turns on a dime. I sat in the car for a second with the engine running, watching the snow build on the hood. The headlights made the flakes look thick, like a curtain. I remember thinking about turning around, not because I was scared, but because it was late and I'd had a couple drinks the night before and I didn't feel like dealing with a cold walk. Then I laughed at myself, killed the engine and stepped out. The moment the door shut, the silence hit. No traffic, no voices, no distant hum, just the soft hiss of snow settling. It felt peaceful enough that I told myself any unease was just my imagination reacting to the dark. I started down the trail anyway, keeping my phone flashlight off unless I needed it. The snow was light enough to see by, and the dark shapes of the trees were easy to follow. Every few steps I glanced back at my car, partly to keep my bearings, and partly because it was the only familiar thing. As the branches thickened overhead, the air felt sharper. The snow under my boots went from crunchy to soft, and my breathing became the loudest sound around me. The quiet should have been calming, and for a few minutes it was. When a small shiver ran through me, I blamed it on the cold, told myself I was overthinking, and kept walking. The further I went, the more the world seemed to narrow. Trees pressed closer together, their branches catching snow and sagging under the weight. The trail itself started to disappear, the shallow impressions from earlier hikers already being softened and erased. I slowed down, not because I felt threatened, but because it was suddenly harder to tell where I was stepping. My breath came out in thick clouds, each one hanging for a moment before fading into the dark. I became hyper-aware of it, of how loud it sounded in my ears. Every inhale scraped cold air down my throat. Every exhale felt heavier, like the night was pushing back. I tried breathing through my nose to quiet it, but that only made my chest feel tighter. I stopped at one point and listened, not because I heard something, but because I didn't. The woods weren't just quiet, they were empty in a way that felt wrong. No wind in the branches, no distant cars, not even the small noises you expect when you stand still long enough. It was like someone had turned the volume down too far. I told myself that snow does that. It absorbs sound. That was the explanation I'd always heard, and it made sense. Still, the silence felt thicker the longer I stood there. I shifted my weight, boots sinking slightly, and the snow made a soft, dull sound that felt out of place, like I'd broken some kind of rule. I checked my phone then, more out of habit than necessity. The screen lit up my hands and the inside of my jacket, no service, which wasn't unusual out there. The time told me I'd been walking longer than I thought. I frowned, trying to picture the path in my head, but everything behind me already looked the same. When I started moving again, I became aware of how alone I was. It wasn't a dramatic realization. It settled in slowly, like cold creeping through a seam in your coat. If I twisted an ankle, if something happened, there was no one close enough to hear me. That thought should have sent me back immediately, but instead it just made me more alert. The snow kept falling, steady and unbothered. Flakes landed on my eyelashes and melted, blurring my vision for a second at a time. I wiped my face with my sleeve and kept going, counting steps without meaning to. 20, 30, 40. I don't know why I did it, only that it gave my mind something to hold on to. That's when I noticed how uniform everything looked. The ground was smooth except for my own tracks. No animal prints, no broken branches, no signs of movement at all. It struck me as odd, but not alarming. I remember thinking the storm must have chased everything into hiding. I took one more step forward, then stopped again, my body reacting before my thoughts caught up. Somewhere ahead of me, deeper in the trees, the quiet felt different. Not louder, not interrupted, just off. I stood there, heart ticking faster, waiting for a reason to explain that feeling. None came. I didn't hear it at first. That's what bothered me later when I tried to replay the moment in my head. There was no twig snapping, no crunch in the snow, nothing that announced someone else's presence. I was just standing there, staring into the trees, when I became aware that I wasn't as alone as I'd been a second earlier. It started as a feeling more than anything else, like when you realize someone is looking at you before you actually see them. The hair on the back of my neck prickled, and my shoulders tensed without me telling them to. I shifted my weight and scanned the darkness ahead, half expecting to see an animal dart across the trail. At first, I thought I did see movement. A shape passed between two trees, tall and narrow, gone before I could focus on it. I blinked hard, annoyed at myself. Snowfall can mess with depth and light, and your brain fills in gaps that aren't really there. I told myself that's what had just happened. Then I heard a sound, not a word exactly, but something close to one. A soft, breathy noise, like someone clearing their throat quietly. It came from ahead of me, somewhere to my left, and it made my stomach tighten. "Hello?" I called out, immediately regretting it. My voice sounded too loud, too sharp, and it vanished almost as soon as it left my mouth. The woods swallowed it whole. There was no answer. I stood there, counting my breaths again, listening hard. Snowflakes brushed my jacket and made tiny papery sounds. Somewhere far off, a branch shifted under its load. Nothing else. I took a cautious step forward, then another. The beam from my phone's flashlight cut through the falling snow in a pale cone. It lit up tree trunks and low branches. Nothing more. I felt foolish for being tense, but I didn't turn the light off. That's when I saw him. He wasn't standing on the trail. He was a few yards off to the side, between the trees, facing in my direction. If I hadn't turned my head at just the right angle, I might have missed him completely. He blended into the dark in a way that made my eyes slide over him. He didn't move when the light hit him. He didn't raise a hand or speak. He just stood there, shoulders slightly hunched, like he'd been caught mid-thought. I couldn't make out his face clearly, but I could tell he wasn't dressed for the weather. No jacket, no hat, just a thin, dark top and pants that looked wrong for the cold. My first thought was that he was lost. My second was that something about him didn't line up. The snow was already clinging to my sleeves and hair, but he looked dry. Not untouched, exactly, just less affected. "Are you okay?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He tilted his head a fraction, like he was considering the question. For a moment I thought he was going to step closer. Instead, he took a slow step backward, deeper into the trees, never breaking eye contact. I didn't follow. I didn't run either. I just stood there watching the space where he'd been until the darkness closed in again. My chest felt tight, and not just from the cold. When I finally moved, it was to turn back the way I'd come, telling myself the smart thing was to leave. Even then, I couldn't shake the sense that I was doing exactly what he wanted. I started back down the trail, but I didn't relax. Every step felt deliberate, like I was trying not to make a mistake I didn't fully understand yet. I kept my flashlight angle low, watching the snow in front of my boots. My own footprints were clear and fresh, a single line cutting through the untouched white. That's when something finally clicked in my head, slow and uncomfortable. I stopped and turned around, shining the light back toward where the man had been standing. The beam swept across the trees, the underbrush, the uneven ground. There was nothing there, no shape, no movement. That part didn't bother me. What did was the ground. There were no footprints, not faint ones, not partially filled in ones. Nothing. The snow around the trees was smooth and even, broken only by my own tracks leading away. I stood there, longer than I should have, staring at the empty patch of ground where I knew someone had been standing seconds earlier. I walked closer, heart beating faster now. I circled the area slowly, careful not to disturb the snow more than I already had. Still nothing. The man had been close enough that I should have seen the impressions of his boots. Even if he'd stepped backward off the trail, there should have been something. Snow doesn't erase evidence that quickly. I tried to reason it out. Maybe the light had played tricks on me. Maybe I'd misjudged where he was standing. I backed up to my original spot and traced my own steps forward again, matching angles, positions. The result was the same. One set of tracks, mine. The cold started to feel different then, sharper, less like weather and more like pressure. I became aware of how exposed my skin felt, how the snow kept finding its way down my collar. I glanced at my phone again out of instinct. Still no service. The battery was lower now, the cold draining it faster than usual. I told myself to leave. I turned fully and started walking faster, following my footprints back the way I'd come. After a few steps, I noticed something else that made my stomach drop. My tracks looked older than they should have. The edges were already soft, partially filled in, like they'd been there longer than 20 minutes. That didn't make sense. The snow was still falling steadily. New flakes landed on my sleeves the moment I stopped moving, but my footprints ahead looked dull, muted, as if time was moving differently around them. I bent down and brushed the surface of one with my glove. Fresh snow came away easily, but underneath it felt compacted, cold in a deeper way. I straightened up slowly, my breathing uneven. That's when I heard footsteps. They were behind me, off the trail, moving parallel to my own. Not loud, not rushed, deliberate. Each step landed a second after mine, close enough that I could feel the timing without hearing a crunch. I didn't turn around. I don't know why. Every instinct told me not to. My body started moving faster on its own, boots slipping slightly as I picked up speed. The footsteps kept pace, still unseen, still wrong. When I finally broke into a run, the sound behind me changed. It got closer, too close. I felt something brush the back of my jacket, light but unmistakable, and panic finally took over completely. I didn't think, I just reacted. The moment I felt that brush against my back, my legs kicked forward harder than they ever had before. Snow sprayed up around my shins as I ran, breath tearing out of my chest in short, painful bursts. The trail blurred, trees streaking past on either side, their dark shapes closing in and opening again like a tunnel that wouldn't end. I could hear my own heartbeat louder than anything else, a dull pounding in my ears. The footsteps behind me were no longer measured. They were fast now, erratic, crashing through snow and brush without any concern for noise or footing. Whoever it was didn't move like someone worried about slipping or falling. That terrified me more than the chase itself. I stumbled once, my boot catching on something hidden under the snow, and went down hard on one knee. Pain shot up my leg, sharp and immediate. I scrambled back up, hands burning, as they plunged into the snow for balance. For a split second, I was sure I'd feel hands on me, fingers closing, dragging me back. Nothing touched me, not yet. I ran again, ignoring the pain, ignoring the way my lungs felt like they were on fire. The trees thinned ahead, and through them I caught a glimpse of something that made my vision swim with relief. The faint outline of the parking area. My car. The footsteps were right behind me now. I could hear breath, fast and ragged, too close to be imagined. I didn't look back, I couldn't. I focused on the car, on the idea of metal and locks and light. When I burst out of the tree line, I almost slipped again, but adrenaline kept me upright. I fumbled for my keys, hands numb and shaking so badly it took me longer than it should have. The sound behind me stopped abruptly like it had hit an invisible wall. I wrenched the driver's door open and threw myself inside, slamming it shut and locking it without thinking. The interior felt impossibly warm, even though the engine was cold. I sat there gasping, forehead pressed to the steering wheel, waiting for something to happen. Nothing did. After a few seconds, I forced myself to look up. The windshield was already dusted with fresh snow. Beyond it, The trail entrance was empty. No movement, no figure standing just out of sight. Just falling snow and dark trees. I turned the key. The engine roared to life, too loud in the quiet. I didn't wait for it to warm up. I backed out fast, tires spinning, and drove away with my heart still hammering, not slowing down until the trees were far behind me. Even then, I kept checking the mirrors, half expecting to see someone standing in the road behind me, watching me leave. I drove straight home without stopping, hands locked on the steering wheel so tight my fingers ached. The roads were already starting to disappear under the snow, but I didn't care. I ran a stop sign without slowing and didn't even notice until I was halfway through the intersection. My only thought was getting inside and locking the door. When I finally pulled into my driveway, I sat there for a full minute before moving. The house looked normal. Warm light spilled from the windows where I had left it on. Nothing followed me. Nothing stood at the edge of the yard. Still, I scanned the tree line behind the house before getting out, my breath fogging up the glass. Inside, I locked the door, then checked it again. I kicked off my boots and noticed they were caked with snow and mud, more than I expected. My pants were soaked from the knee down. I went straight to the sink and washed my hands, watching the water run red from where I'd scraped my palms when I fell. The cuts weren't deep, but they stung. I tried to calm myself down by replaying everything logically. Maybe it was someone messing around. Maybe I panicked and imagined the rest. The lack of footprints bothered me, but snow can do strange things. I told myself that over and over. I didn't sleep much that night. Every time the house settled or the wind pushed against the siding, I jolted awake. In the morning, the storm had passed, leaving the world bright and deceptively peaceful. I almost convinced myself it had all been an overreaction. That afternoon, I drove back to the trailhead. The parking area was plowed, but the trail itself was untouched, a clean white path leading into the trees. I followed it slowly, heart beating harder with every step. My footprints from the night before were gone, buried under fresh snow. I walked to the spot where I remembered seeing him. I stood there for a long time, scanning the ground, the trees, the brush. There was nothing, no tracks, no disturbed snow, no sign anyone else had ever been there. I went home feeling foolish and unsettled at the same time. I didn't tell anyone what really happened. When I tried to explain it in my head, the story fell apart. There was nothing to point to, nothing to prove I hadn't imagined the whole thing. But every winter since then, when the snow starts falling suddenly and the world goes quiet, I remember how it felt to run through those woods, knowing I wasn't alone, and having no explanation that still makes sense. I've never been back there at night. That's probably the biggest change I can point to. Before that winter, snow felt inviting to me, quiet, comforting even. Afterward, it became something else entirely. Not scary in an obvious way, just heavy, like it carried too much silence with it. I did eventually tell someone about it. Not right away and not in detail. Months later, I mentioned it to a coworker during a conversation about hiking trails. I kept it vague, framed it like I'd just gotten spooked by someone acting strange. He laughed it off and said people do weird things in the woods all the time. That was the end of it. I didn't push further. A year after it happened, I moved out of that place. Not because of the incident, at least not officially. I told myself it was for work, for convenience, for a shorter commute. All of that was true. But I also never liked how close the trees felt after that, especially in winter. The way the yard backed up into darkness once the leaves were gone. Even now, I catch myself paying attention to details I never used to care about. Footprints in fresh snow, how long it's been since they fell, whether they start and end in places that make sense. I notice clothing more too. Who looks prepared for the cold and who doesn't? who belongs somewhere, and who feels misplaced. Nothing like that night has happened again. No voices, no figures, no moments where reality slips, just enough to make my stomach drop, but that almost makes it worse. There's no pattern, no warning sign, nothing to guard against. Every winter, there's always one night where the snow starts falling heavier than predicted. The world goes quiet fast, like someone turned the volume down. When that happens, I stay inside. I make sure the doors are locked. I keep the lights on. And I think about how easily I could have stayed home that night. How nothing forced me to go out. How close I was to never having a reason to question any of it. I still don't know who or what I saw out there. I don't know where they came from or how they moved through the snow without leaving a trace. I don't even know if there was ever more than one explanation competing in my head. All I know is that something happened on that snowy night. Something that doesn't fit cleanly into any version of events that makes sense. And every time it snows unexpectedly, I remember how quiet the woods were just before I realized I wasn't alone. Hi, this is Mansoor, your scary story narrator. Foreign Frights HQ is where I share real and unexplained horror stories narrated in my own voice. If quiet, atmospheric fear is your thing, you're in the right place.